into just a little bit about local climate versus world climate. Bill's going to start it, and then we're going to talk to Jeff and Colleen and Lydia, and they're doing some really, really positive stuff. But let's start with Bill, because there's trees and climate, as we talked before, trees can have an effect on, you were talking about the carbon sequestration, but they also have local effect, don't they?
So absolutely. While the conclusion that I gave you in the first half would indicate that planting a lot of trees in cities might not have a lot of effect on atmospheric carbon dioxide and climate change, they will have a lot of effect on the local climate in cities. And of course that picks up on one thing that Colleen said, which is that you notice that your hot asphalt, your driveway is a hot asphalt in the summer. I'm just going to expand that a little bit and said anybody that drives from a suburban parking lot of the shopping center, where there's probably no trees, into a shaded neighborhood will realize that that neighborhood's a whole lot cooler. And so the other thing that planting trees in cities can do, discounting their effect on carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, is a vast amount of cooling. And that cooling comes from the fact that every gram of water that a tree takes up from the soil, as it's converted to water vapor and lost through the pores on the leaf surface, what are called stomate, carries with it 580 calories of heat in our old terminology. That's probably not the way modern physicists would like to describe it, but I think it's a way in which we understand. So the act of taking up liquid water and converting it to water vapor, a process when performed by a tree, by root uptake and evaporation out of the leaf surface, is called transpiration, is an enormous cooling mechanism. In a natural forest, undisturbed by human activities, of the rain that falls on that forest every year, roughly half of it leaves through the trees. The rest of it leaves either through evaporation off of surfaces, which is also cooling, or runoff into the local river. But the fact that half of it is removed by the green vegetation means that when you cut down green vegetation, you've lost potentially up to half the cooling effect. And of course that is vividly seen in paved areas, impervious surfaces in cities during the summer. So one of the first things we can do in terms of cooling is to plant trees in cities and couple that with the replacement of impervious surfaces with surfaces that allow the rainfall falling to the surface to actually sink in where the trees can get it, take it up and transpire it. I think there's huge potential there on a surface that's been made impervious by paving. Sometimes 90% of the rainfall that falls will be lost as runoff, unlike the much smaller, about a third in the natural area. And if we can reduce the amount of runoff by making most of our surfaces permeable to water soaking into the soil, then planting trees with their cooling capacity will have an enormous impact on our local environment. Not surprisingly, some trees are better than others at the cooling effect. Trees that have evolved in wet areas, things like sycamore and the like, that we normally associate with wet soils, are, they're more flagrant with their loss of water than miserly oaks that transpire it a little more slowly. So you probably want to, if you're a local arborist, make a selection of what trees are planted in cities depending on water availability and the simultaneity of the conversion of impervious surface to pervious surface. That might make the difference between whether a sycamore or something like an oak would be the appropriate thing to plant. So this transpirational cooling is not to be overlooked in terms of making cities of the future livable. They may have a lot of people in them, they may be consuming a lot of resources. They may not be taking up much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, even if we plant a number of trees in them. But I'll guarantee you that the more trees that you plant in an urban area, and the more water you allow to sink into the soil and not run off by making the surfaces more permeable, will result in a cooler city that's more livable, particularly cool during the nighttime period when a lot of deaths are found. So that's my uplifting message.
Is that all you got?
Obviously, I like my trees standing up, but like a lot of forests.
All right. Well, let's move then to Jeff. I saw him do a video this afternoon that they were taking here at the Arboretum, and he talked about something called natural climate solutions as opposed to unnatural climate solutions. Jeff, talk about that, how that's working with trees, but you said in your notes that you wouldn't go into the agricultural thing, but I think you should at least touch on that so people understand the difference.
Sure. Yeah, so this is summarizing some work of some science colleagues at the Nature Conservancy looking into what they've called natural climate solutions, which is a nice way of talking with donors and supporters about our work and on the one hand, but it's also really an inspiring way of thinking about how we can employ nature to help us in the fight against climate change. And this group of scientists looked at a set of about 20 activities that include restoration, improved management, and protection of natural areas and agricultural lands around the world for their potential to sequester additional carbon and to avoid additional emissions of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. And had some really stunning results about what was the potential for these natural climate solutions in the near term around dealing with climate change. I've always thought if Mother Nature was trying to make her pitch to an impact investor about this stuff, it'd be something like, I've got this device. It's this solar-powered machine, self-replicating, that takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turns it into food and building material and fiber, and it occurs in 10,000 varieties so that it operates under a variety of environmental conditions. I'm ready to invest. And 6 weeks ago, Dilbert built this is really what it's about. And as Bill was saying, 1 billion trees in cities, it's going to help on the sequestration side. But he's right. Several trillion trees around the world do have the potential to make a significant impact on addressing climate change. So looking at these natural climate solutions worldwide, reforestation accounts for nearly half. This study estimates that by 2030, over the next 12 years, that window of opportunity, like the international panel says that we have, to avoid hitting 2 degrees Celsius by making dramatic impacts. Reforestation gets us halfway there. Other natural climate solutions, including improved management, working with farmers on cover crops and improved nutrient management, we can get 37% of the cost-effective emissions reductions we need over the next 12 years with natural climate solutions. It is not a fix. But it is a big part of the solution set. It's something that we have the technology to deploy today. There are other carbon capture technologies that are on the horizon, but they're 5 or 10 years out. We can plant trees today, and they can start taking up carbon dioxide tomorrow. So this is just kind of pointing out where are the big ones in the U.S. around improved management of forests. I lost an arrow. Anyway, one of the other big ones you mentioned, talking about the agriculture. In the United States, actually, the second most cost-effective natural climate solution is working with farmers on establishing cover crops. I just had an interesting conversation with a gentleman downstate in Champaign County who's looking to adopt cover crops on his farm. And we see that there's a huge potential because these cover crops that are planted after the corn and soybeans are harvested and have that living root mass in the soil through the winter months, they help to scavenge fertilizer so that the farmers need to put on less of it the next spring, so less energy goes into the more fertilizer they would have had to put out there. And those roots that grow through the fall, lie dormant in the winter, and grow again in the spring before they plant the next corn and soybeans, are actually to help rebuild the soil organic matter in that soil, improving carbon sequestration there. So there's a huge benefit in working with our agricultural partners on these natural climate solutions. And here in the mid part of the U.S., that is probably the single biggest thing that we can do in terms of running the clock backwards, in terms of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sequestering it as soil carbon that improves the productivity of those soils.
All right. All right, let's move on to Colleen and some of the work that you're doing. We've heard about sequestration. We've heard about how cooling, trees can affect cooling. So what about the folks in these urban areas? What can trees do? What are the ancillary effects of trees in an urban area, Colleen?
I guess it's kind of like why all of you are also here, is because trees provide more benefits than just around climate change. And people are really concerned about their quality of life and what they're motivated to take action on. The truth is, Americans are terrible at going on a diet, and we need to actually consume less and emit less emissions. So we need to consume less energy. And that is very hard for our public to get behind and to change. I think there's some we can learn maybe from the public health sector about how our country suddenly really did change about how we smoke. So maybe there's lessons that we can learn from, that was not an easy thing in our society to smoke less. But that actually did happen, and it improved public health. So I think there's things that we have to do to change our current behavior about how we consume. But tree planting is a much easier thing for people to get behind because it's actually this positive benefit. You get this beauty in your yard. You come to the Morton because it's beautiful. So people are inspired to plant because it brings them other benefits. And climate change can feel like this, this impending doom that we maybe don't feel like is really going to affect us. And so we have a hard time acting today on that. So I think that one of the things I find just engaging the public is how can trees make their neighborhood a better place to live? And so we get a lot of people who will volunteer to plant in their parks, along their city streets, in vacant lots, because they want it to be a beautiful place for their community, a safer place for their kids to play. Meanwhile, it's actually providing them other benefits. So I'm sure Bill would have a lot more details on this, but things like trapping air particulates from diesel emissions on the leaf area surface can improve our air quality, which is of course important for people who have asthma. So you can think about that kind of benefit when you talk to the public about what will motivate them to act. There's been a lot of studies, and this is really important for a place like Chicago, where you have more tree cover, you have less crime. So it's been documented in many cities. A 15% increase in tree canopy leads to a 10% drop in crime. It's not a correlated study. It's not saying the tree is what's reducing it, but it's likely something like the trees are creating a cue, a visual cue, that people care about this community, it looks better, and there's less likely for negative activity to take place. It's like the idea of graffiti or broken windows that lead to more crime, because those are visual cues of neglect. If you have a blighted area that looks bad, bad things will happen. But if you have a beautiful area, it's less likely. So there's all sorts of benefits beyond climate change that people derive from trees, and I think it's something that we can build a lot of support for. And we can be much more inclusive about involving people to make their neighborhoods a beautiful place, and at the same time, adapt to climate change.
All right, so let's get you and Lydia talking about some of the programs that you've implemented in the Chicago area, obviously, and out on the East Coast, to get folks invested in the trees in their neighborhoods. Lydia, do you want to start with that?
Yes, yes. So let me just start. Oh, I'm flipping off. Is everybody getting sick from me?
I hope not.
I hope not too. So as many of you have heard us talk about before, the census that the Arboretum and the U.S. Forest Service conducted in 2010, we're just gearing up to repeat this in 2020. But when you look at the benefits that trees provide to us as individuals living here in the Chicago region, it isn't solely about the carbon. And in Chicago, I looked this up online a couple of days ago just to get a perspective of how our trees were doing with carbon, and it's been supported by what Bill has told us too today. That in Chicago, there are 31 million tons per year of carbon dioxide produced. And for the 157 million trees that we had in 2010, we had, for carbon sequestration, it was 677,000 tons per year, or carbon storage of 17 million tons for the trees themselves. which is almost half of what we're seeing there. But what we think about when we talk about trees and we talk about climate change and our quality of life being impacted by climate change, we try as a Chicago Region Trees Initiative to talk to people about thinking about trees as infrastructure. Just like your roads, just like your water lines, just like your sewer lines, your utilities, that trees are critical infrastructure for urban living. And that these trees have tremendous benefits that we can all derive from. So one of the things that we focus on is policy and the impacts that policy can have across our region on preserving and protecting trees and recognizing that trees are critical infrastructure and that resources are allocated towards planting and caring for our trees for our quality of life, much the same as they are for filling our potholes, which we're all very sensitive to about this time of year. So what we have done, and I've talked about this before, and I believe last year I brought it up, is we have these canopy summary packets available for you all on our website for each and every one of the communities in the Chicago region and many of the Chicago neighborhoods. And so, for instance, I just pulled up Lisle because I feel like many of you might be close to Lisle, and we're sitting right here in Lisle tonight. Within one of those each of those canopy packets, we have a little benefits pie chart that talks about 3 individual benefits that the trees provide for us in our communities. And for the village of Lisle, air quality, it's $415,000 worth of benefits that we get from our trees every year. And obviously, air quality is tied to all of the pollution that our cars are producing and our furnaces are belching out. And then carbon sequestered is 116,000 pounds per year, or $116,000 per year. And then stormwater is $238,000 or $239,000 worth of stormwater benefits per year. One of the things that I often talk about when I meet with groups is we just lost 13 million ash trees to emerald ash borer. And if we estimate the average diameter of those ash trees to be 10 inches in diameter, which isn't very big when you think about some of the larger ones we've lost, that's 13 billion gallons of water that was being intercepted or taken up by those trees that we now have to deal with. And the loss of those trees has not been replaced. I mean, even if we replaced every single tree that had been lost by due to EAB, the inches of those trees that were lost have not been replaced yet. So we have a bit of effort to go yet to get those trees large enough to really provide some more significant benefits to us. When we look further at this interactive map that we have on the ChicagoRTI.org website that the previous pie chart was from, it shows you that in Lisle there is over $3.3 million worth of carbon stored in the Chicago, in Lisle itself by the trees that are here in Lisle. And while they may not be able to sequester all of the carbon, that's a lot of carbon that we can benefit from those trees actually providing those services or those benefits for us. So when we presented or we pulled these canopy summary packets together, thank you, Chuck. That's fine. So I've gone back and forth. I'm supposed to be the mop-up batter, by the way, so I'm supposed to talk about how this is relevant for you all. So I sort of grappled with trying to identify what I wanted to bring to your attention tonight. But one of the things that we have done is we've tried to identify where we need to provide the most effort and energy to helping communities across the region. And as Colleen mentioned, we often find that where we have low income, higher poverty, often low number of English speakers, we often find that we have lower canopy and we have some of these more significant impacts from climate change. And that, in fact, is what we've done. We have taken the statistics that we know about our forest based on the canopy summary, the U.S. Census data, and other data in order to identify where we need to be really focusing our efforts and trying to help those who have fewer resources than we do. And just some of the things that we think about with respect to climate change and its impacts on these vulnerable populations. We've included population density, which is something that Colleen talked about, housing density, percent poverty, median household income, percent on food stamps, percent unemployed, percent minority. Total Medicaid reimbursement is often an indicator to us of some challenges in communities. EPA toxins, So, and impervious surface, flooding, capacity to care for our trees are other data sets that we've looked at. So when we think about impacts from climate, again, when we think about vulnerable populations and individuals who need our help, those are some of the things that we've taken into account when trying to identify where to put our efforts out. And that's not to say that we aren't neglecting those of you or me that have more resources and are able to plant and care for trees across our neighborhoods. What we do know too is that for us in the Chicago region, that the areas where we have the most potential to have an impact is in our neighborhoods. In our residential areas is where we have the most potential to improve tree planting and improve quality of life. And so as we think about, you know, as you, in your mind's eye, you're thinking back about your yard and where you could drop down another tree. That tree is not only helping you and benefiting your property, either through increased property values or visual beauty, it's also benefiting your neighbors and other folks that are in your community. So when we think about what we can do about that, there's some things specific that you as individuals can do to help improve the impacts or reduce the impacts of climate change and improve quality of life. One, Colleen picked this out right away, being a forester. This tree that has the beautiful red leaves on it, everybody that I've shown it to would say, oh, that's a maple tree, right? You all think that's a maple tree? Yeah. I see some people shaking their heads. So it's a sweet gum. We have 32% of all the trees in our parkways are maple trees. And if we lose maple trees, and keep in mind that 20% of our parkway trees were ash trees, we're going to be in a big problem. So going back to what Chuck was talking about before, expanded species diversity is one of the best ways that you can hedge your bets against losing trees due to impacts from climate change. When we think about improving tree care, whether it be to plant trees correctly or just to water them, with increased drought during the summer months, we're going to be seeing our trees struggle. And one of the things that I will tell you is that unlike me that turns purple in the face and is soaked with sweat after being out in the sun, and it instantaneously happens, trees can take years to show the impacts of drought on their systems. So what happened a couple of years ago may show up a couple of years down the road. So be thinking about what you can do to water and care for your trees correctly. The last thing, or the next thing is impacts, human impacts to trees. When Chuck was talking about the Anthropocene and the impacts that we as humans have had on the environment and will be known for by the millennium of generations to come ahead of us, or after us rather, one of the things that we can do is to reduce impacts to trees. A gentleman here was talking to me tonight about how they want to work to preserve and protect legacy trees in their community. You cannot easily replace a legacy tree, at least not in your lifetime. So be thinking about that, but also be thinking about the person that's caring for your trees. Are they weed whacking that bark and creating damage to that bark? Are they driving equipment over the root systems? Are there things that you're doing to impair the health of that tree that will decrease its life? And then this darling little insect that's in the lower left corner, Asian longhorn beetle, it has a pretty broad palette of things that it likes to eat. You as a homeowner can be the front line of defense on identifying where potential pests and pathogens show up in our neighborhoods. Emerald ash borer was found by an individual who was just happened to be out and noticed this darling little green bug that was on their ash tree and reported it, and that's how we discovered it here in the Chicago region. Asian longhorn beetle has been here before, and it was eradicated, and it keeps coming back into O'Hare. So as you have an opportunity to take classes and learn about tree care, whether it be here at the Arboretum or through your local community college or just in reading, it behooves you to take the opportunity to do that because you're protecting quality of life just not only for you, but also for future generations and reducing impacts to climate change and helping to improve quality of life across the board for you and wildlife and other living things that we have in our area. So my little segue here is to plant trees on your property. Again, residential is the best opportunity you have, expanding species diversity, improve tree care, and reduce threats. And then my little plug for the Chicago Region Trees Initiative is we just finished our master plan, which focuses on risks to trees, which is our reducing threats to trees, which is our third goal on our list there, which includes climate change. But the first is to inspire people to value trees, and that's really you folks here that are here tonight are the individuals that are really interested in trees. And we need you to share that enthusiasm with your neighbors and your friends and other people you come into contact with, so that we can increase and improve the Chicago region's tree canopy, enhance our own ecosystems, and reduce threats to trees, so that we can all live a better life in spite of the challenges that we have with climate change.
In terms of tree diversity, I've heard more than one arborist say, if you want to know what tree to plant in your own yard, see what your neighbor's growing, and then pick something else. And make it a native. If you can. Although we had a discussion about that too. So there's room for all kinds of trees in the world. Okay, we have just a couple more minutes here, then we're going to open it up to the audience. Before we get to Chuck, to wrap things here, Colleen, did you want to talk for a couple minutes about what you're doing in the New Haven area? Because you're doing some really cool stuff too.
Well, I'll just add a little bit, but I think Lydia just gave us a great blueprint of ways that everyone can be involved. In our city of New Haven, the way that we're doing it is our students at Yale are going out to plant trees in New Haven, and they're only doing this at request of a resident who says that they will water that tree. So that was on Lydia's list. If we can just invite the public to help water the city's street trees, that will really improve their likelihood of establishing and not dying, so the investment of putting in a tree. So how we are planting them is Yale students are teaching high school students how to plant trees, and it's typically the high school student's first job. So there's mentoring of a college student with a high school student, teaching them how to plant. And we're also hiring adults who are returning from incarceration, from living in prison to coming back into their community. And coming back, we know they have a stigma of having been in prison. And this ability to come and plant trees is letting them show that they can do something positive in their communities. And so that has been really inspiring for us for the last 10 years to work with people with that life history and help give them a second chance and do something positive in their city. And we have found that that has really reduced the number of people who repeat and go back to prison. Just having that chance of doing something positive and getting a job and planting alongside Yale students has remarkably reduced their return to prison. They really stay out of prison from that experience.
Yeah, so we talked about that on my show on Sunday, and they were doing this at Cook County Jail, when you introduce people to horticulture, to agriculture, to planting trees. It's just, it changes people. It changes the way they look at the world. All right, Chuck, bring it home.
Okay, I can't really follow what Lydia said. I think she did a great job kind of giving you good recommendations for what you can really do in your own homes, and my recommendations are not quite so specific. But I wanted to kind of think about what we do in the Center for Tree Science, and so kind of alluding to Bill's blog post talking about the country mouse and city mouse and how they differ. Thinking about how country trees and city trees differ is also very important. So when you're thinking about how you select trees, where you plant your trees, kind of knowing where those trees grow best naturally in the country, in their natural environment, and be able to kind of match that up in the locations, in the built environment, that kind of broader expanse of the human impact, the impact that humans are having on the landscape, not just the city center, but across the suburban landscape into the industrial areas, into the surrounding areas, kind of understanding where that country tree might fit into the city, and also realizing there are places in this environment that really don't have an analog out there in nature. So we're going to have to help trees adapt to situations and environments and things that they really don't naturally want to be in. So we're kind of forcing these trees to live in ways in which they don't really want to. And one thing that we've learned a lot about trees is that they're very connected in natural environments. Through the ground, the roots are connected, they're communicating with one another through volatile signals, through the atmosphere. And so there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of kind of, responding to one another, facilitating one another in that environment. But when you plant them in the cities, they're oftentimes just right there in that little pot, in that little area surrounded by concrete, and they're isolated. And so those situations are very different. So when we think about this spectrum from the urban center out to the wild areas, we can think about how trees will fit into these different parts of the landscape, these smaller cities, the mixed agriculture, the monocultures. And so how can we kind of maximize the benefit that we can get from trees in all of these different places? And we'll do that by understanding which trees grow best where. And I don't really have these specific answers and can't tell you that right now, but I think when the research that the Center for Tree Science is doing, and our many collaborators in the Chicago area and across the region, we can kind of get closer to that, and we can begin to suggest and think very, with a lot of expert knowledge about how we select and plant our trees. And one of the things that we're doing, just a quick example that the research that the Center for Tree Science is doing regionally. So just last year, we're coming up on Arbor Day this year, and so this is almost a year in progress now. We have a research partnership with the Illinois Tollway, and so we have actually experimental trials planted along the tollway to see what kinds of trees grow best, how best to amend the soils to get kind of maximize the growth and health of those trees, and to also kind of see how those trees connect with the surrounding landscape in the tollway. So can you kind of extend those ecosystem benefits that you might have outside of the tollway and bring that in by connecting it through the trees? And so we're doing this in partnership with the tollway, and I think this is a very exciting, very unique partnership, and we hope to continue this and kind of expand it, because they're going to continue to plant. They have a plan to plant 58,000 trees along the tollway, and we would like to have some fraction of those trees involved in experimental science. Because the tollway, if you think along the highway, that's one of the harshest environments to grow a tree. So if you can grow a tree in that space, that tree probably has a good chance growing almost anywhere. So it's kind of a testing ground, it's kind of a testing bed, so we can really look at those species that will do well in our urban environments. And just kind of finish up, I just wanted, we're kind of wrapping up our master plans and kind of putting these thoughts together. So the Center for Tree Science, we seek to create the scientific knowledge and technical expertise necessary to sustain the trees in all of their diversity in our built environments, in our natural landscapes, and our living collections. So it's, for example, here at the Arboretum. I think these are very important resources that we have as a community, as a society. Botanic gardens led the way in much of the kind of development of empires around the world. It actually was a major source of economy and growth throughout the world. Coffee, all of these products that we're very used to now were introduced to our culture through botanic gardens. So I think botanic gardens could play a very central role in the development of scientific knowledge, and then translating that into technical expertise that we can then use to kind of plant the right tree in the right place at the right time. So with that, I think we can open it up.
Yeah, I think so. And it was one of the things at lunch was, and I'll help you with getting these mics out too. I can do my best Phil Donahue here. We talked about, when we were talking earlier, was tollways. Who knew? But there also might be helping Monarch Butterflies as well, because the tollways in Illinois are planting milkweed. And there are other states that are doing that sort of thing. So sometimes your allies come from the strangest places. All right, there's a hand there. This gentleman, you got this gentleman, and I'll go down. You got, okay, fine.
You're there.
Go ahead, you sir.
I have two questions. The important question is one that Jeff alluded to, but if you drive on I-88 across the Fox River, drive I-80 to Deed Lodge, the other Morton installation, across western Illinois, Iowa, and eastern Nebraska. Your census said there were 137 million trees east of us, and on that road, there are about 11 trees. So the question is, isn't there really an issue about the fact that where we grow food, we don't plant trees? In fact, if you drive that, what you see is along the waterways, the farmers are cutting the trees down and burning them.
Yeah.
So that the ratio of land devoted to feeding us compared to the land where we live, and if you carry it down to the Amazon and the other issues, that's really where the issue is. Urban, where you got a lot of, actually have a lot of trees, and agrarian where you can afford them? That's my first question, and the really important one. The second one is that Bill raised a question about sycamores versus oaks, and sort of suggested that you shouldn't be trying to restructure the oak forest, but sycamores are a much better choice. The Morton Arboretum, I recall having made the oak an issue. And how does that go up against the analysis of transpiration?
So that's the easier of your two questions. I don't know whether the Morton Arboretum was trying to cool a regional environment with planting oaks or not. What I suggest, if it was up to me and I wanted to cool in a city block, I would remove a lot of impervious surface and replace it with things that allow permeation into the permeability into the soil. And then I would try to plant a tree that had a high transpiration rate, which would be a sycamore. That one where you get your maximum cooling. This is not to say that oaks are bad. I mean, I like oaks. Oaks are beautiful and oaks do a lot of good things for us. But if the specific goal is to provide cooling, and if you've got enough water to allow that tree to perform that action, something like a sycamore or other wetland species is the way to go. Let me make a little comment on your other question. So, you didn't state your other question as a question, so let me do that, pretending it's Jeopardy. What you're really saying is...
Isn't that really the issue?
Yeah, the issue is there's too many people on the planet. We're trying to feed too many people on the planet, and the result is that we're denuding the landscape to do that. Not just for food, but I suspect a lot of the removal of riparian trees that you see going west of here is growing corn for ethanol and other kinds of purposes. So what you're pointing out is that the rate of population growth, the rate of increase of humanity, bumping up against the primary productivity of the Earth's land surface to provide for food and in many cases now fuel to sustain the lifestyle of those people. That's a huge question. It's often the elephant in the room. Nobody likes to talk about it. I'll talk about it, but nobody, not many people like to talk about it. But I think that's really what our problem is, and we've got to bring those, the population numbers and the consumption numbers into some kind of accord.
Anybody else on stage want to
So
address?
I would say the Arboretum is leading the Oak Ecosystem Recovery Plan, and that's for another meeting, another night, to talk in depth about that. I will tell you that in pre-settlement, prior to Europeans arriving here in northeastern Illinois, there was more than 1 million acres of oak woodlands here in the Chicago region. We only have 17% of that left now, and 70% of it is on private property. So again, this is a call to duty for you folks here that we need an oak tree on everybody's property.
All right, let's take another question.
This question is probably for you, Colleen, because you introduced us to the subject of how, in fact, do we find motivation or inspiration to make the necessary changes. Those matters are probably in motion. So I'm going to ask you, it could be a hard question if anybody else wants to answer. About a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, just a word, The Overstory. Your reaction to that as a possible motivational tool for change?
I haven't read the book, so sorry that I can't comment on his book, but I actually, someone just emailed it to me yesterday, you have to read this book. So now you've seconded that. I do think that we need leadership on climate change, and we don't have that right now in our country. And we all, it is, I think, a call to action for everyone to kind of wake up to the challenge. And it's difficult when we hear things like, well, one of the problems is too many people on the planet. So that's a very difficult thing to think about. How do we change that? And I've already had my children, so so if you think of I think, do I tell my children don't have children? So there's trying to think about what is the action and what inspires us. I think if part of what inspires us is for our children or our grandchildren or just for humanity, that we want to make the planet a place that they can continue to inhabit, then how do we think about how we conduct our daily lives? Because planting trees, and we should plant and open our yards, and we should water the city street trees, and we can make those investments of time and caring for the planet. But we also do need to think about how we consume. So the size of our house, the size of our car, thinking about what we consume on a daily basis. Because even though China leads the way now, and it's because they have so many people, that they now lead the world in global greenhouse gas emissions. But the US, which has a much smaller population comparatively, leads the way per person. Per individual, we are the biggest consumers. And I think so it's upon us all to care about that, be educated about it, and I'm so impressed you're all here on a weeknight, so you obviously are motivated people, but this is another part of the kind of elephant in the room is that, it's very hard for us to change our behavior, and I think we have to, like public health, we have to think about what gets people to exercise more, what motivates people to take care of themselves and their planet.
By the way, this just in, Richard Powers, who's the author of The Overstory, will be here on September 26th, so you're all going to want to come back for that. Who is next? I know we have a gentleman here who wanted a question.
Yes, two quick questions for the panel, if I could. Does anybody know if the urban forest canopy in the Chicago metro region is growing or declining in general? And second question, has anybody ever run a study to check out a ratio of how many trees will we have to plant to offset the carbon footprint for each new human being born on the earth?
So our canopy is down at least 2% since 2010. And the Arboretum, as I mentioned, is getting ready to redo the census, which is 2,000 plots across the Chicago region that major size species and those types of things. And so we hope to have more information on additional decline that we may see. We anticipate to see that we're going to have an increase in some of the invasive species that we're experiencing. And what's fascinating about invasive species for us is that they're some of the most climate adapted species there are. So they're going to continue to be a significant problem for us as we move forward. I can't answer the number of trees for carbon sequestration, but...
Everybody's looking at Bill.
Well, I was running the numbers through my head here. I think for a U.S. citizen, adding a U.S. citizen at current rates of consumption of U.S. citizens, the answer would be 50. 50 trees.
Per person.
Per person, to balance the emissions of the typical person today. I wanted, doing math in my head is not something I've ever been good at, so I want to check that, but that's what my initial guess is.
So just to give you a comparison, in the Chicago region, we have 17 trees per person here, and 30% of those are invasive species. So if we were to try to recoup what Bill is talking about, we would need to really up our game.
Yeah, can I address that for a second? Because that's something we talked about at dinner. Is something you said 30% are invasive, but even invasive species are still trees and have some benefits, right?
Yes, that's true.
They're all carbon.
Do they?
Yeah,
but
they do.
I assume they don't outweigh the detriment.
Well, it depends. We're right now seeing that our oaks are not regenerating. They're displacing our native ecosystems. They're creating significant challenges for our soil chemistry. So there are lots of things that they're doing. It's like saying that the
Talking about allelopathic tendencies and that sort of thing?
Yeah, right. So, when you say a tree is good only for one thing, it's much bigger than that. So there are a lot of things that these invasive species do that take out of balance, I think, the impacts that they
So the bad outweighs the good in general, or you just can't say?
If you ask me personally, I would say yes.
Okay.
A scientist may have a more scientific answer.
There's somebody else going to, next question? All right, go ahead.
Yeah, is it okay if I just make a comment rather than a question?
We love it, then we don't have to do any work up here.
You can tell me, but I'm part of a homeowners association. We've gone through the ash borer, we've replaced, 150, 200 ash trees.
Put that up a little closer to your mouth.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that better? So, and I'm a believer that even if you replace one tree, it's a benefit. I believe everything that you're saying today, and I'm very motivated to do it, and I'm working with all of our homeowners. But I just wanted to make this comment as we replace our trees. In the last 5 years, we've gone through this huge learning curve on how to do it. And the devil is in the details. So we take down our ash trees, what are we going to replace it with? Not another ash tree. What do we do? And I do want to tip my hat to the Morton Arboretum. Ching, ching, ching. You guys have been terrific. We've used the resources of the Morton Arboretum and the Plant Planet. They've taught us a lot about the replacement trees for our soil, for the atmosphere, for a lot of the things that are going on. Even though they don't have all the answers, it's a good guideline. And we used to use general line landscapers to plant the trees, and they didn't always do a good job. They didn't always put the tree in the right height. They dug too small of a hole, and I guarantee it for a year, and then 2 or 3 years later, you got a tree that's really declining. And we have switched over. I mean, we haven't used baby tree. Not this is a commercial, but they know what they're doing. And there's other tree companies that know how to plant trees. They know how to do it. There's a roof layer on the tree that has got to be level with the ground. That's A number 1. And then the third thing is our homeowners in our neighborhood. They have to be part of this. And so we will not plant a tree, a replacement tree, unless they commit and sign a form saying that they will take care of it, they will water it appropriately. Appropriately is a key word, not too much, not too little. We happen to use gator bags. There's a lot of different types of things you can do with the gator bags. They're wonderful. For about a 2.5 or 3 inch diameter tree, you can put a gator bag on there, you water it once a week, you fill it up, it's about 20 gallons, and it's a no-brainer. So it's so easy because we've had problems where people are leaving hoses on for an hour, and they flood and the trees die, which is probably the biggest problem. And then, but we are very cognizant of the drought, especially in the hot summer. So. But I encourage anybody who's involved with the Homeowners Association or just in your planting trees, use the resources of the Morton Arboretum. They really help us.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry,
an addendum? Go ahead, hold the microphone.
He lives in exactly the same.
No, she has to use the microphone, please.
He lives in exactly the same kind of community I live in. We lost so many ash trees. What I want to know is it better to plant deciduous trees or evergreens? Which type gives the greatest transpiration rate? Or does it matter? Oh, doesn't it matter?
Right tree, right place.
Yeah. Well, people want to plant evergreens for privacy, but that's not diversity. And you know what I mean?
You have to be careful because a lot of the evergreens are very site-specific.
Yeah.
So, and we have such heavy soils here that it can be problematic. So you need to be careful. If you go to the Morton Arboretum, to the tree selector, and you put in the last use soil type where you're planting it, and those, you just check the boxes, and it'll give you a list of species that are appropriate for where you want to plant.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, we have time for about 2 more questions, and all right, I'm going to get to you second. This gentleman has his hand up before.
A forest is a forest to me. What's the difference with an urban forest? How do you define that?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Why don't you do that?
It's not a scientific term, so let me start there. But it means that these are the trees, the collection of trees in our city. And the trees in the city are in the backyard, in the front yard, along the city street, in a vacant lot, in a public park. They're the whole canopy of trees in the city. So it's a new, I'd say rather new term, and it's really because of the growth of cities that we even think about, instead of thinking about single trees, like an arborist will look at single trees, when you think about the whole canopy, you think about the forest in the city. So in New Haven, and like the work that Lydia's done here, we know the percent canopy cover across our city. We know the species distribution across our city. So for example, we know in New Haven, the most common street tree is an invasive tree. It's a Norway maple, and the second most common is a pin oak. So we know going forward, when we're planting, we want to have a diversity of species in the city, that we have to think of it as a forest, and we have to think about what, even when we have to get to the right tree, right place of a specific species for a specific location, you also have to think about the composition of the entire forest and what is the diversity across the forest in the city.
I would add to that too, and thinking about the ideal. I mean, so the ideal should be that it is an urban forest functioning as a forest. I mean, so thinking about the country tree and the city tree really shouldn't be this isolated individual that isn't connected to the surrounding individuals, and it can't communicate, it can't share resources, and it can't facilitate the other trees' growth. Which, I mean, there is competition, but they also facilitate their growth. But I think the ideal would be to create an urban forest that functions as a forest does naturally. We might not be there all the time, so we might have different parts of the city that have different levels of connectivity, different levels of reaching that ideal. But I think that ideal is what we should be aiming for, even though we might not achieve it everywhere all the time.
Okay, we have time for two more questions. This woman here, and then there's a gentleman right over there.
Can you suggest a resource or resources to help us better reach diverse urban audiences? You know, race and class, just looking at this room, you know, aren't abundantly diverse and represented. And so any tips you have of success stories in the country with the Dalton community work?
I mean, I would say in the work that I do in New Haven, we work in those communities and we listen and ask, what are the concerns in their community? That's why we have a green job program, because oftentimes while people were happy to receive trees, they'd say trees are nice, but what we really need is jobs. And so we listened to that and said, okay, well, let's hire people and teach them how to plant trees. And that's something we developed in partnership with the city of New Haven. So we are now in a strange place for a university to be the sole source of all tree planting for a town, but that's what we do in our town. So it starts with, I think the key thing is to listen.
I would echo that, and also finding a local community partner that represents that local community and empowering them, and not assuming that, you know, we're the outsiders, we know best, here's what you ought to be doing. Empowering those local communities to improve their own neighborhoods.
All right, and one more question before we go.
I also want to add something to what the gentleman over here said before about how to kill a tree. When he said, you know, not all landscapers know how to plant a tree. If you ask your lawn mower guys to plant a tree, oh, sure, we're going to dig a hole plant right there, no problem. There you go. I've seen many neighbors kill their own trees, not because of that, but for other reasons. They are more interested on making sure the lawn is nice and green, that as soon as they see a dandelion growing around the tree, they go there with their, you know, chemicals and spraying around. Then what's going to happen? Oh, my tree died. Maybe they didn't plant it right. Well, maybe that's another thing we need to do. Worry less about green lawns and plant more trees. I mean, as anybody knows, what's the percentage of oxygen that the grass produces versus a tree? What's the benefit between versus grass and trees and shrubs? We've been kind of brainwashed about, oh, green, put your green lawn, it makes it nice, it looks great. How about plant a tree in your backyard? Oh, no. Somebody else got to do it. I got to look up at green grass. You know, and then when deforestation happens and we have problems with global climate, global warming, oh, yeah, you know, all the deforestations, you know, people cutting those trees somewhere else. How many trees have you planted in your backyard? None? Well, then we gotta be responsible. Start at home. And start pointing fingers to somebody else.
And I will point out that a tree is going to have, likely to have more success in the backyard than it is in a parkway. In you know, what they call a health strip. It's going to do a lot better, or at least it has a fighting chance there, unlike, or in a tree pit, you know, so that's really good advice.
Yes.
All right, well, before I let you all go, I want to thank the Chicago Council on Science and Technology. They're taping this, and I want to thank all of our speakers today, Dr. Bill Schlesinger, Colleen Murphy-Dunning, Chuck Cannon, Jeff Walk, and Lydia Scott. Let's give them all a big round of applause.